My name is Fran Scott, and I describe myself as a scientist, maker, and pyrotechnician. But that's only because when you're asked to describe yourself in such a small, short sentence, it's really difficult, as I'm sure you find as well.
Yeah, I mean, what do you make?
Oh gosh. Well, I've always made large science props, I suppose is the way to describe it. So visual, physical entities that can describe scientific and engineering ideas. And I was going to say recently, but it was about 10 years ago, I got into sort of digital making. So your Raspberry Pis and your Arduinos. And so that physical computing element. So making things from the virtual world do something in the real world.
So making pyrotechnician.
Yeah. And scientist. So I'm an engineer in, I say, every bone in my body, but I'm not a qualified engineer. So I don't like, if people call me an engineer, that's up to them. But in terms of, for me, engineering, I don't want to disrespect those with the qualifications. So I never label myself as an engineer.
It's funny because we all see you as an engineer. I think that you make stuff and you like things explode and are on fire and things like that. Like, I think that just puts you in the engineering category because it's so hands-on.
I would love to be, but yeah, I'm quite, I suppose, respectful. I don't, if other people call me that, I'm very flattered, but I wouldn't go brandishing myself as an engineer. I know engineering, but I wouldn't say I'm an engineer. I'd love to be an engineer and labeled as one, but yeah, I leave that up to people, I suppose. Let's
face it, anyone that works with Raspberry Pis has got to be an engineer. So I love the fact that you are sort of like straddling so many different parts of like a multi-circled Venn diagram.
I do and I don't, I suppose. Everything that I do all comes back to the same thing for me. It's just not a category that's normal, and so people are like, oh, you do so many different things. But for me, I love making, I love manufacturing, and I love being a cheerleader for those who make and those who manufacture. And everything I do, I suppose, ticks that box. It's just I do it in every way possible. So yes, I also do podcasts with manufacturing firms and robotics firms, but also I like to encourage the next generation into engineering and manufacturing. And so I design school workshops and shows that look at all the innovation that's going on around that. And so, yeah, for me, it's sort of in the same box, but I can see it looks quite just spread out to the onlooker.
Well, I personally find what you do so refreshing because I think it takes a lot of courage to merge different disciplines together because, you end up being a trailblazer when you're merging things and going cross-discipline. And there has been a tendency in the past to put us in different boxes. And the fact that you have always stood strong going, I'm just going to go across all boxes or many boxes, takes a lot of bravery. But can we start by you sort of describing your journey? Because, saying you're a scientist is like a tiny sentence which encompasses so much. So how did it all begin with you?
So I wanted to win the Nobel Prize, and that was how my journey started in science. I did love science. I grew up on a farm, so I was very, very hands-on. I sort of sometimes hark back to this time where I loved working with wood, and I would go off to a field with a penknife and a bit of wood and try to make something, and it would, just not be great at the end of it. But it was just something that I really loved doing. And I suppose to me, what was great was relative, because I remember some of my work in woodwork and stuff, the teachers were like, oh, this is incredible. And I was like, oh, but it doesn't do the thing that I wanted to do. Or not, like, so I loved making. Now, for me, I went to university at a time that technology courses weren't counted towards your UCAS points, and so you could only, like, some universities wouldn't accept them. So I ended up dropping technology. I think it was graphic design that I was doing, which sounds very paper based, but it was actually quite model based. And I would have loved to have done that, but I ended up dropping it to get the right points to get into uni. So I ended up taking chemistry, biology, physics, and maths at A level with general studies. Did I do anything else? I did five in total. Then so at university, what I was going to do was, I loved maths at the time, so I was going to do a degree in maths and a degree in biology in tandem. Who would do that? So I applied to, what was I thinking? But I applied to a few universities, like not many universities do it. But there were a few that did. But when I went to the open days, they were like, oh yeah, the biology and maths, they go together. You've got the statistics side and then the sort of ecological and animal biology side. And I was like, oh no, that's not the types of maths or biology that I like. I like the non-statistics maths, and the biology, I like sort of like the human, the mechanical side of it. And they were like, oh no, we don't put those together. Like, why do they go? And I was like, oh, they don't go. I'm just interested in both of them.
Engineering.
Yeah, exactly. It's so engineering without knowing that it's engineering. And to be fair, so my granddad was an engineer, and my mum was like, oh, you would fit engineering. And I was like, I didn't give it the time of day that it deserved, because I suppose I was scared of it. To me, it was like, oh, it's something that I haven't done at A level, so I'll be behind everyone. To me, it was like, oh, everyone's gone to the good schools that's done engineering or Latin. You know, you just assume that everyone else has done it. And I was nervous enough going to uni as it was, and so I was like, oh, I don't want to be the bottom of the class just starting out. So yeah, I didn't even apply to do engineering, which, you know, hindsight's a beautiful thing. But after I decided that doing 2 degrees in tandem was probably not the wisest idea, I had applied for 2 places to do neuroscience. So I ended up picking Nottingham to do neuroscience, and it was one of these, I call them an undergraduate master's, where you do 3 years, get 1 free. So yeah, 3 years lectures and then 1 year in industry. And for me, so I remember in the first week or 2 of university, they were like, oh, you can do, you know, in your year in industry year, yes, you can go and work at a drugs company. And I was like, that's not me. That is not why I've done neuroscience. Or they were like, oh, so, you know, one of you will get to go to Australia. And I was like, oh yeah, I'll do that, thanks. And they're like, oh, to do that, you've got to be top of the class. And I was like, okay, right, here goes. And so I just put my head down. And so, yeah, in the 3rd year of uni, I got to go to Australia and study stem cells. And bear in mind, this was 2004. So stem cells weren't huge at the time. And for me, I was like, oh, this is my route to Nobel Prize. But I hated it. I hated working in a lab. Looking back, I now know why I hated it. And it was because it was really inefficient. And I hate inefficiency, especially if it's me having to do the work that's inefficient. And I couldn't frame this in my head at the time, but so much could have been automated to free the human up. So I always said that I liked, and I called it the postulating. I liked the thinking, the getting the results together, thinking about what they showed, what they could show, what the next experiment could be. And basically, and I know I was very low on the rung in science, but that was probably 2-3% of my time. And the rest of the time was doing these very precise experiments that could go wrong for all manner of things, and then just trying to get results. And to me, there was a lot of interpretation in the results of when you look down the microscope, what sort of neuron is it? And it was like, well, what's our category? You know, is there a standardization? And I just got very frustrated and I suppose disheartened, because I'd been there and I'd always wanted to be a scientist and win the Nobel Prize. And here I was doing science and going, no, it's not for me. And also I'd been exposed to a lab. And being exposed to a lab, I was like, this isn't my tribe, I suppose, for want of a better word. I didn't feel like I belonged. And so when I came back and studied my final year of my degree, it was actually my careers tutor at university that suggested science communication. And I was like, what now? And to me, that really fueled me, because I was like, oh, maybe if I can convince my people that I liked science, but my friends weren't scientists. I was always friends with non-scientists. And so I was like, oh, if I could convince people that are like my friends to like science, then maybe more people like me will feel as if it's their home, their place. So even if the work isn't particularly efficient, there might be other reasons to stay, or maybe they'll come with a new viewpoint to make it efficient. So so that was the start of my career into science communication, was actually a uni careers advisor.
It's so interesting when I hear you describe what you gravitated towards and what you didn't. Like, you are a true engineer, in my opinion. I mean, the fact that inefficiency really frustrated you, you were like, so much of it could have been automated. You know, let an engineer have that thought and they'll come up with the solution, you know. And so it's really interesting that no one suggested it for you, because, you know, in this day and age, it would be blatantly obvious that some sort of engineering is for you. I mean, the idea that you thought that 2 degrees in tandem would be easier than doing engineering is like, where are your careers advisors? You know, you know, it's I feel like I relate to you in the sense that, out of feeling a bit lost, we found science communication because we didn't want anyone to maybe go through what we went through.
Yeah, to me, it's like the reason I'm not an engineer means the system must be broken, because I am an engineer in my DNA, in everything I do. So why didn't I choose engineering? And there's a myriad of reasons. And so what I want to do is try to slowly, just, you know, like a whack-a-mole, get rid of those reasons one by one. And so the younger me could be like, oh, well, yeah, I'll try engineering. But you make a good point in terms of, because, you know, when you do look back and you're like, oh, what would it have been like if I had chosen engineering? But I know engineering now is quite different to what it was, you know, 17, 15 years ago. And in terms of just times have moved on, quite rightly. And so would I have done a degree and then been put off at a later stage? And so I suppose I don't like to look back and go, oh, shoulda, woulda, coulda, I suppose.
Because, I mean, also science communication really is a very unique skill. You know, when I look at you and the talk you did recently at the Engineering and Technology Innovation Awards, and then Yewande as well, who we both know, and she's been on the science communication circuit as well. Like, it's just really listening to someone with a technical brain speak well is really something rare. And I'm so glad you're doing what you do, and what you do is so visual and so exciting and so inspiring. It would be a great loss if you were tucked away in a back room somewhere doing engineering, you know?
Yeah, I suppose I take what you say, and I'm laughing because so I got diagnosed with dyslexia in early 2020, and that to me it shone a light on everything that I've done. So I think basically my job is such a good fit for my personality and my skills. And when the assessor for dyslexia, she was saying, oh, you're very hands-on, but you understand technical, but language, the way you like things presented is not oversimplified, but you like the things that need to be said in a certain way and presented in a really understandable way, but not for a child, I suppose, and it's like, no, that's what I do, because basically I've had to do this my entire life without knowing it. And so in a way that makes me really good at doing it for other people, explaining the complex. I always call it seemingly complex, explaining the seemingly complex in a really digestible way.
So what is your ambition with what you do? Like, what's your purpose?
So I really want people to, well, there's an overall one, and there's, I suppose, a selfish one. So my overall one is for young people to, if they have an inkling that making or engineering might be for them to give it a try, and for them to feel like it's a home for them not to be excluded because it's not their tribe or they don't quite know what it is. And so I suppose it's, number one, allow them to see what opportunities are out there, and then support them to allow them to see that there are people like them in the workforce doing amazing things. So I suppose I don't want a bones and DNA engineer to not become an engineer. That's my bigger goal. And then I've got my selfish goal where I just love meeting interesting people that are doing interesting things. So I say to people, if I could just spend my time going around manufacturing plants and industries and just meeting people who are making and innovating amazing things, meet them, talk to them, see what they're playing with, I would absolutely love that. But yeah, to me, that's a selfish thing of just like, I would pay to do that.
I mean, the landscape has changed a lot, don't you think? Like,
absolutely,
manufacturing, like, it's really going digital, and it's. When I first started out in engineering, it was very older white male, and it's just changing. Like, there are some really young, cool women on the scene now who are coding and all of that. Have you seen that change?
Yeah, and it's changed in, I would say, multiple ways. So, well, firstly, the whole manufacturing sector was absolutely turned on its head in the 60s, 70s, 80s. And I was at an exhibition yesterday looking Maurice Brownford. Oh, I can't remember his last name, but Maurice, that used to take the beautiful images of manufacturing plants and just sort of seeing these plants. And I was really lucky. I got to go and see SSI up in Teesside. So the blast furnace and the steel making plant. And so it was very, I suppose, community based, and the whole family would work at the place. Now, yes, there were your white men, but there was also women. It was very much like the family would go to work at Rolls-Royce or the steel plant. So it was very much a family and community based thing. But although it was precisionally orchestrated, it was quite dirty work, I would say. And now, obviously, manufacturing has changed a lot. There is still a lot of hands-on, but gosh, with digitalization and automation, they say it's the 3Ds, the dull, dangerous, and dirty. Those jobs are being done by robots, jobs that perhaps people shouldn't be doing in the first place. But I still do think there is this community based around industry. And that's one thing that I see, because I do a lot of work with Siemens and National Grid, and they are very keen to work with the schools that are in the area where they need the workforce. But what they're seeing is that there's sort of a discrepancy between the skills that they need and the skills that the people that are local have. So instead of them going, oh, well, we'll just look elsewhere, what they do, and this is why they bring on my company, they go, well, let's try and train up the local people so they have the skills that we need, because we want to support the local community, because they see that value in that link between, you know, this big industry and the local community. But I do think it's changing, I suppose, just in the way that the face of the UK has changed, and the way that there is so much more freedom in terms of what we can choose to do with our lives. And so you're getting people from all kinds of backgrounds going into engineering, which is huge. And it's just a joy to see that it's not just pale, stale and male. Like it's an absolute joy to just someone contact me and be like, oh, I'm really liking engineering. And I'm like, amazing. Like, come join it, because it's so different to how it used to be. And the thing is, the engineering sectors are really trying to hold on to these people. So I speak to companies of where they're like, yes, we get females, but then obviously when they, you know, not obviously, but if they go off and raise a family and take time out, then it's like, how do we retain them? What can we put in place to make sure that they come back into the workforce? Because they're a really valued part of it. So yeah, it's changing in so many ways, but I think the core values of it are still there.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of gender stereotyping, it's changing generally. Like, I just feel like gender stereotypes are kind of diluting, boundaries are becoming blurred. It's all just a non-topic, you know.
Oh, I hope, but I would say I don't agree there. Like, I would love to agree, but I think there's a band of people who realize that gender stereotypes are ridiculous and just hold people back. And then there's a group of people that are like, what's wrong with having t-shirts where there's only boys playing football on it? I can't believe you're triggered by something so trivial. Well, no, of course the woman should take the time off to look after children. So I think there's actually
still coming across that
still today. And I know a lot has changed, especially as well, I'd say, in the last, even 3 years, and it is getting better, but it's still not there. You know, all you need to do is go around a children's clothes shop and have a look at the clothes that young girls are subjected to, you know, the messages of be kind, love everybody. And, you know, and the boys are like, or trouble, or future engineer, or that type of thing. So I think it's so ingrained in society that sometimes it's hard to see it. And I think that's the big step. And I was really disheartened, I think. But so with the Sarah Everett, with the protests around all the unfortunate things that happened there, I was like, this is going to be amazing, because people will now see this inequality that happens and we'll all try and fix it, right? But actually, there was a lot of people, even within my circles, that were like, well, there's no problem. Men still have problem in the street, getting into fights. That's the biggest statistic. You know, you're more likely to come to harm if you're a man on the street by other men. And actually it wasn't this. I thought that this inequality being revealed would make people open their eyes and then go, oh gosh, how can we help? But just the fact that the hashtag not all men was trending it really made my heart sink, because, and it made me realize that actually there's so much more work to do with gender stereotyping than I thought, because it's not just a case of saying, hey, here are the bad things that happen when we gender stereotype for for all genders. It actually, we've got to do more than that. We've got to actively try and help the people to see the problems. Hang on, I've just got a doggy that's digging my skirting board. Bitcoin, stop it.
Bitcoin.
At least he's within grabbing distance. So yeah, yes, amongst people like us, I would say we see gender stereotyping and we just go, oh God, that's so silly. But actually it's really instrumental in a lot of people's lives still, whether they know it or not.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to establish in my own mind where we are at in engineering, because even the event that we were at, there were definitely more women there, which is very refreshing to see. A lot of the speakers were female and awesome, and inspiring, but yet it felt like a very male event. So there is definitely more work to do, but I think generally the conclusion is that it is really all about attitude, because when I speak to women who are in engineering, the older women tell me about how they have survived and thrived in very male-dominated environments. And the younger women tell me about how their colleagues are actually really welcoming. I think it's a lot to do with attitudes. I think older attitudes struggle to adjust, and younger attitudes are very open to gender and it's a non-issue and they're just cool with everyone. And so I'm kind of like trying to figure out, like, are we still continuing the stereotypes?
Yeah, I would say as well, like, in all fairness to the older generations, I do think a lot of them are really trying. But I would just say in terms of actually times have changed so much. And it's been accelerated this year. You know, like, time has changed since I've been in the workforce. And so I can't imagine someone who's, 60, 65. Stuff has changed so much that even so they can want something with all their heart for it to be equal, but just something that was acceptable 40 years ago is now just totally unacceptable. And it's just, it must be really difficult knowing in your heart that you don't mean to say the things that you say that are offensive, but them coming out that way. So I think we should really give the older generations, I suppose, credit for trying. But I can imagine it's very difficult to say the right thing all the time. But yeah, with the younger generations, it's just like, oh, well, this is what's acceptable. Just like how you know how to do a PDF, it's the same type of thing. Like, obviously one is much more offensive than the other, but it's like it is getting so much better. And obviously I'm not saying that there's not work to do. There is still a lot of work to do, but it's going in the right direction. Yeah,
I feel like your main direction in life is to encourage more people to make stuff and do things and engineer and be involved in manufacturing and that side of industry, which is really, really needed. And I feel like it's almost an aside that you're female doing that. Do you think girls need a bit of a push and encouragement in what you do?
I did. mostly because, and this is where the gender stereotyping comes in, and I can't wait until gender stereotypes are out the door, because it just makes everyone's life better. And it's not just about making it better for women. Like, it would be better for men and everyone else as well. There's like the toxic masculinity. Gosh, I don't know how I would cope, being labeled as having to provide for my family and have to be tough all the time and never cry. Like, it must be horrible. But I suppose I can only speak from my point of view of, like, when I was growing up, it was very much, and I still feel it a bit now, I suppose, like, I've been on here, making sure my hair's okay and this, because as women, and there is evidence to support this, not that I can reel it off right now, as women, we are disproportionately judged by the way we look, which I hate. But sorry, this dog is playing with so much stuff in the house. He's now got pallet wrap that I'm going to turn around. There's going to be this dog just wrapped up in pallet wrap. So yes, we're judged on how we look. So when I was a teenager, it was very much like, this is the normal thing to do for a female, for a woman. And in that normal thing, it wasn't wear a hard hat. And I know that not all engineering is wear a hard hat, but I do love, it wasn't go into engineering, wear overalls, do this type of stuff. So actually, to choose engineering would have been going against the norm. And that takes guts that I didn't have. And so I think it's not just women that I'm trying to reach out to. It's everybody who thinks that this type of job is going against the normal stereotype box that they're put in, to give them the courage to do actually what they love and what they're built to do, rather than what society labels that they should do. Yeah.
Fran, clearly as a dog mum, your time is very limited and distracted. It does spring to mind the question, like, what about juggling children in the mix of all of everything you're doing? Is it an option?
Well, I suppose it's always an option. But it's interesting that you ask, because so I have given this a lot of thought, as I suppose, as women. So I'm now 40. And I suppose since the age of 30, every visit to the doctor has been like, so you're going to freeze your eggs now? You're going to freeze? And it's like, whoa, can we just stop with this? But I've been in a really lucky position. So I was always of the mind that I wouldn't have children until I could afford a 2-bedroomed place to live. That's me. That was my line. And it just so happens that it's only now in the next, I suppose, 6 months that I'll be able to afford this 2-bedroom place to live. Bitcoin. He is being so naughty. Stop it. You need to behave, you little doggy. You are coming here and you're going to settle down. So, he is cute though, right?
Yes. We forgive you.
But what this I loved London, and I wasn't prepared to give up my life that I had in London to move somewhere cheaper to get the bigger house to bring up a family. It also happened that I got divorced about 8 years ago. So I didn't have a partner either, which was a bit of it. But what all of this did was it gave me the luxury of time, because ever since leaving university, I'd sort of been on this, I suppose, treadmill of like, you've got to get a job. And then once you've got to get a job, then you've got to find a boyfriend. And then once you've found a boyfriend, then you live together for a bit. And then you get a house with a mortgage. And then you have a family, right? That's how it how it happens. And I was going full steam, 60 miles an hour towards that. And then when me and my husband decided that actually maybe this isn't right and we were talking children, but I was like, oh, I don't really want children yet. And he was like, oh, maybe I do. But like, it was like, oh, okay, maybe this won't work. But then that getting the divorce and me being single for a bit and dating, one, sounds cheesy, allowed me to really think about what I wanted, and do the things that I wanted as well. And thinking over the years, because it's been a big thing for me coming to 40, it's been like, if I do want children, I need to make that decision pretty smart. So actually over the last 2-3 years, I've been logically trying to think about whether I wanted children. And I don't. So in the scheme of it, like I was looking at those people that had children, and yes, I get the biological urges. But when I see how, one, the state of the planet and the population increase, that's not something that I want to add to personally. And also the things that you've got to give up and the things that I would want to provide for my offspring, I don't have those resources. And I really, really like my life. and I was like, do you know what? I don't want them. And a big thing for me was, so my family has adopted children in the past, and they're lovely and they're very much part of the family. But it gave me this thing of like, I just don't have that urge to have biological children. And by not having that urge, in a way, it's like, it's just taken the pressure off me, because I've been like, well, maybe when I have my 4-bedroomed mansion with garden, I can foster, I can adopt. And I know that, that's not a shoo-in, you don't automatically get to do that, but that's a thing that I could provide. And yes, I might choose to do that later, but I'm just, having biological children is just not for me.
It's really interesting you're opening up about this topic, because I don't think women talk about it enough.
They don't.
I think women in STEM get to talk about it, because we're trying to be women in STEM accepted in a very homogenous people that are not like us. And so we don't want to talk about things that make us even more underrepresented. So thank you for being so open about this topic. I completely relate to you. I'm actually older than you, which is, I hate remembering how old I am, but
look at your skin though, it's amazing.
It's the lighting. But no, I just feel like it's okay. So what I was thinking when you were talking is, your journey isn't conventional, right? You haven't had a conventional journey. It's not like, people go to school and they look at your life and go, I want to do what you have done. They may look at what you're doing and go, that's so cool, I want to do that. But they won't necessarily dream of taking the exact path you've taken, because it sounds like you took the path in the moment, always choosing what was the right decision for the right time, kind of thing. And I totally relate to that. That's also my story. I just made decisions in the moment. Basically, I never planned my life out, like 5-year, 10-year plans. And it's turned out the way it has, and I'm really, really happy. But because I wasn't able to plan, I didn't know when to fit in motherhood, because of course I would love to have children, but I'm now the age I am, which is older than you, and I just am so Like, how come I never did that? And I wonder if it's a thing for women who choose careers where there aren't many other women, because we don't have a template.
Like, there could be that as well. Like, and I think I just wasn't ready when other people were seemingly ready. And I didn't know if it would come later or and there's a big, and I've done a hell of a lot of thinking around this, and I think one thing that struck me was I was Googling once, because I was like, I'm a big advocate for fostering and adoption, and I was like, maybe I do want children. And then I Googled one day, is it selfish to want children? And the only results that came up was, is it selfish to not have children? And I thought that was really telling, and I have this discussion with people that are close to me where I'm like, actually, and I sort of say child-free, as a child-free woman, sometimes you are judged and looked down on, and it's like, oh, you're immature, oh, you're not giving to society, you're not. And I'm like, oh, well, actually, like, and people go, oh, no, it's silly, no, of course. And it's like, well, no, actually, like, there are small, and I know we call it like microaggressions that happen, that it's like, no, I my time is just as worthy as your time, even though I don't have children. And there is this little thing in society of where it's like, well, if you don't have children, then surely you're available. And I've found that really interesting. But yeah, I've done a lot of research into, is this what I want? Or is this what, and it comes back to the gender stereotyping, is this what I'm being, and it's not, I'm not saying this happens for everyone, but is this what society is persuading me that I want? And yes, of course, there are the hormonal urges that come, but like, hormonal urges are not the be all end all when it comes to how I live my life. Like, I don't run around the park naked. There are certain things of where you can go, oh yes, I'm feeling this, but this is not actually logically what I want. And a big thing for me, I should say, came when, so the guy I was dating a guy for 3 years, and he had 3 children, and they are brilliant, absolutely brilliant. 3 fiery, determined, smart women. And I loved them with all my heart. And I was like, I didn't realize that you could love a child and I was so protective of them, if something and they lived over in Australia, so they weren't living with us, but when I was like, if anyone says anything about these girls, like, and yeah, I didn't realize that you could love so much children that aren't your own. And once I realized that was possible, then the whole thing of like, oh, this I must have biological children thing just faded away, because I was like, wow, it's really unimportant. The DNA is really unimportant to me.
Yeah. Gosh, I mean, I would say that for anyone who's listening to this part of the conversation, it's a much bigger conversation that maybe, a group of us women get together and talk about. I hope that is something that can happen at some point soon, because I'm going through that. My partner has 2 kids and I don't have my own biological kids, and I'm struck with how much love I can feel for somebody else's kids. Mm-hmm. But it's like a whole other conversation that, I would love to delve into, because I'm discovering it now.
Yeah,
it's not something that I was ever prepared for. I've never been with anyone that's got their own kids, and so wow, I mean, it really is like a giant subject. But I guess, like, to bring it back to women in STEM, like, I really see you as someone who is just living out what you were put on this earth for. It's more, I think your strongest message is, you know what? Even if people don't understand what it is that drives you, keep driving.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do careers talks on this in terms of, and like, hats off to Siemens sponsor these talks. And basically the talk is, whatever you're into, there is a career out there, not a job, a career that will really, really suit you. Don't be driven into being pigeonholed really early on, because it'll only make you unhappy, if you know what I mean. And yes, you'll get a job, you might go to uni, you'll get a job, you'll find a partner, find a house, have children. Then at 40, 45, 50, you'll go, what have I, where's my, why was I doing this job? Oh, I got this job to get the house to do. And it's like, actually, life can be so much more than that. And I know that there are, I call them the rich kids. There are the rich kids that are like, go where your heart, follow your heart and this. And we haven't even covered how I got into TV without having anybody that I knew that was in TV, and not even knowing how to go about it. And like, so I'm just settled down, lovely. Like I look back and it makes me really emotional that I did it, because I'm like, how did I even know where to start, and how did I keep on going, and oh yes, it's worked out, oh that's brilliant, but it's like, oh gosh, that was a challenge. And it all comes in ways that you don't expect. You try 1,000 things and then it comes in the one way that you haven't tried. But yeah, absolutely. Like, I've wanted to really just settle down. I really wanted to make the most of my life, and a bit of that, I suppose, comes from my mother, because she gave up a lot to have children. My mum is the most intelligent person I know. She is phenomenal. And yet she gave up all work to have 4 kids. And so I think, well, actually, I owe it to her to be as happy as I can and to make the biggest difference that I can, because why wouldn't I?
Actually, you know what, Fran? I'm just remembering your really, really inspiring speech that you made at the ENT Innovation Awards. And what really touched me the most was how you celebrated yourself, and you had this kind of cringe tone about you, where it's like, I'm celebrating what I've done. I'd love you to tell that story, but also I feel like we haven't even touched the tip of the iceberg of how amazing you are. And I have heard your amazingness in this hour, but there's so much more to it. But why don't you tell that story? And that will close us out of this episode for now, because I think that will really leave people with your key message.
Fair. Well, what story is it that you would like? I was
communication, because I think engineers are natural communicators. Do you remember that story that you told?
Yeah, the one from the so yeah, so basically, sorry, this is, I'm such a dog mom at the moment. So yeah, like, I'm growing up, no social media, and so, like, there was basically, if you had something worth saying, you're invited onto mainstream media to say it, and that was quite an honor. And you know, there were the authorities that would invite you onto there. And then social media came along, and I have like this hate relationship with social media. And as I got used to it, basically there were like, I thought there were these two groups of people. So like, I was very much a worker, got on with my job, and this was like one group of people. So the people that would do the work. And then there seemed to be this other group of people. Just settle down, lovely. And there's this other group of people who would spend their time telling people about the work that they did. And I was like, wow, like if you've got such spare time to do these posts and videos about the work you're doing, maybe you should just pull some more weight actually at the coalface and do the work. And I sort of viewed them as a bit sort of profile raising, I suppose. And in my head, they were quite arrogant. And he's found the stall. And then so over the time, basically, that social media was around, that's when my career, I suppose, took off. And I ended up presenting on CBBC for a while, and I was getting invited to like ceremonies and networking events. And I'd be at these networking events, and people would be telling me about the work that I had done. So not the TV work, because they saw that, but I'm a producer and I would produce events. And so they'd be like, oh, this thing happened and this was great. And I'd be like, yeah, I did that. Like, but they didn't know that, and they weren't asking my opinion. They were basically, I suppose, explaining my own work to me without wanting any input from me. And I was just getting really frustrated by it. So I went to my agent and I was like, what am I doing wrong? Like, people are patronizing me. And he was like, well, do you tell them about this work you do? Do you tell anyone about this work that you do that's not the TV related stuff? How are people meant to know? You know, are you assuming that they know? Isn't that arrogant? And it was that you said the word arrogant that I was like, oh my gosh, there I've been all the time. Hold the phone. Bitcoin. I don't know what he's doing. Have you got my... Hang on, he's got my sound protector. I need to get this. You can't eat that. You can't eat that. So there I had been all the time thinking that it was the people that were telling people what they did that were arrogant, whereas actually I was being arrogant to assume they already knew, that they had looked up all the stuff that I'd done, like done all this research. In these days when we're bombarded with so much information, for them to take the time out to look up about me with information that I wasn't even putting out there. And so, yeah, so my message about communication was, it's not arrogant to tell people about the stuff you've done. It's arrogant to assume they already know. And so make communication part of the innovation process, because like in that room, there were amazing people that were coming up with brilliant inventions and things like that, that like, actually, for them to be implemented, people need to know about them and welcome them with open arms. And if they don't hear about them, that's just not going to happen.
Yeah. Well, Fran, you are amazing. Everything you're doing is really helping to boost the workforce in manufacturing and making.
That's
and
what I'd love.
Engineering. You're inspiring just as a person in their own right. We haven't even heard the half of what you're doing. Done. But thank you for...
But also bear in mind, just I know we are going to wrap up, but bear in mind the reason I got in touch with you, because I was like, what you're doing is incredible. So like, I take all of these compliments that you're giving to me and I'm like, oh, yeah, that's nice. But you know, like you're doing amazing things yourself. So yeah, thank you for inviting me on and doing this podcast in the first place. And we've covered questions that I didn't think would be COVID, and I didn't know that I had the answers to these questions either. Turns out I do.
Yeah, I always feel that these chats are kind of taking a pause and kind of reflecting off each other, and just just consolidating how far we've come. And I think we've both come a long way, given that we were graduating at a time where women really weren't meant to be doing what we're doing. So pats on the back to both of us.
Hey, yeah.
May we continue to have an impact and do this kind of service for other people. So
absolutely. Send the ladder back down.
Yeah. So thanks, Fran.
Thank you so much.